Good morning, LinkedIn. Welcome to Thursdays with Culture Talk. Happy day before our Labor Day holiday here in the US. Maybe some people have already taken off for the long weekend. So whether you're joining me live this morning or whether you're watching this broadcast later, I want to tell you a little bit about Culture Talk and Thursdays for Culture Talk. I'm usually here with Teresa Agresta, who is my co-founder and partner at Culture Talk. Teresa actually did take the week off a little bit early, and she's off hiking some mountains in New Hampshire. So Teresa, I hope you're having a great time. I'm Cynthia Forstman. I'm coming to you from Denver, Colorado. And I'm delighted to have you join us. We have been doing a series of LinkedIn Lives over the past 5 weeks. We've called it the Roadmap series. And the thinking behind that name is there's so many times when an organization does some kind of initiative, particularly with an assessment tool. And so we ask employees, let's take an engagement assessment. Let's take a satisfaction assessment. Let's take some kind of leadership assessment. And we use it once. We use it and we have a great meeting around it, or we have some kind of team building workshop around it. And then it kind of disappears and we never hear about it again. And so what we have been sharing with you are how do you use the Culture Talk assessment tools in a way that's kind of on repeat? How do you use them and the ideas behind this system in a way where you plant seeds and then the ideas deepen and enrich themselves over time, and you can actually go back to them and take the same ideas and do new things with them. So that's the Roadmap series. Culture Talk, if you're completely new to the conversation, is a platform that is designed to turn this idea of culture, which can feel very intangible, into something that we can sort of see, feel, taste, hear, understand, have conversations about it, because we've taken the time to make the culture that we're experiencing something that is tangible. So that's what Culture Talk is all about. In our Roadmap series, we have talked about things like how do you do leadership development programs, team development programs, how do you merge cultures, shift cultures, how do you build brands that are reflective of cultures. In today's session, what I want to talk to you about is engaging teams. It's actually one of my favorite ways and a very powerful way to use the Culture Talk framework, which is a storytelling framework. We call it Archetypes. Archetypes are stories. They're human stories. And they provide in organizations and on teams, and even with individuals, a really quick way to understand each other, kind of a shortcut to understanding who am I, who are we, and who are all of us when we get together. I had the opportunity to be part of a program almost a year and a half ago that was sponsored by Sounds True and LinkedIn and some other organizations. It was called the Inner MBA. And one of the teachers in the Inner MBA was a gentleman by the name of Steve McAdam, who is now retired and serving on boards, but in his work life, he was actually the CEO of a global semiconductor company called Empro. And I remember the day Steve came into a class and said, leaders, all of us need ways to manage, and I'm going to read his quote, the ongoing challenge of human beings working together. The ongoing challenge of human beings working together. I think if you have been a leader or you are a leader, even if you are a parent or a teacher, I think that phrase really might resonate, right? It's an ongoing challenge. You may have a day where things are going really well and everybody seems to be in it and on board with whatever you're offering that day. And then you may have other days where you're like, what happened? Why is everybody acting out? Why are people not engaged, right? It is an ongoing challenge to have human beings working together. Steve goes on to say, even more than managing operations successfully, it is cultivating the upside of human potential that helps organizations achieve their strategic objectives. So this coming from someone who ran, multi-billion dollar international firm, saying, all of the operational side, the money side, all of those things are easier to manage than actually who are the people that are working here and how do we get them, joining us with the full heart and mind again and again. I was thinking as I was getting ready for this conversation about in my own family, and this is my natal family. So I'm one of 10 children and I have 6 brothers. And I learned a lot about parenting, as you might expect, from my own parents. And I can recall a conversation I had with my mother talking about one of my 6 brothers. And she said, boy, he was always very capable, very smart in school, always just gave the bare minimum, kind of like that BC student, not super motivated to really in a classroom show up fully and engage fully, kind of just going to put in the bare minimum. I think we're hearing that called quiet quitting today, right? People that are sitting on the sidelines and saying, I'm here, but I don't really want to be here and I'm not going to give all of myself. Fast forward, after college, this particular brother went on to become a PA. And when he decided that he wanted to be a PA, and he had been working a couple of years, he decided to start studying to take the test in order to get into school. He did it wholeheartedly. He put his entire self into that process. And when he took the test, he scored number 1 in the nation on the entrance exam to become a PA. So my mom used that story to illustrate, you never know what's going to light somebody up. It's different for everybody. And how, again, as a parent, as a leader, as a teacher, how do you get people lit up? How do you pull them in? So no matter what else is changing at work, we know there's always things changing at work. Today, we've got remote teams, we got virtual teams, we've got all these challenges that get in the way of really engaging people. How do we keep them motivated? How do we get them motivated? How do we light up those kind of fires? It can sound easier. So let me talk about archetypes and how we use the CultureTalk framework, how our CultureTalk partner community, so we have certified partners, take these ideas of storytelling and bring them into organizations and teams, specifically around engagement. So I'm going to go back to what archetypes are for just 1 minute. They're human stories. And I want to underscore that we are wired for story as human beings. Stories make us lean in. They make us make connections. Things become more meaningful when you talk to me through a story or when you share your story with me. We've talked about the neuroscience behind that, kind of how our brains kind of sync up when we talk in stories, that neural coupling that happens. I read, and I didn't read the article, I saw a headline this morning and I bookmarked it for later, coming out of a neuroscience publication that talks about how even remotely people's brains can sync up when they're focused kind of in a story. And it was talking about people playing video games remotely and how their brains sync up. So I think there's hope for us on remote teams that those kind of connections and that neural coupling can happen. Also, our hearts are wired for stories. So when I tell you my story, our like vital signs, our heartbeats start to get in sync with each other as well. So think about that on a team. You're trying to get everybody in, you're trying to get them all caring about the same strategy, all moving in the same direction. And there are really, I'm going to talk about individual archetypes and individual story as a starting place, because even though we're talking about engaging teams here, obviously teams are made up of individuals. And so when someone, in our case, uses the CultureTalk for individuals assessment and measures what are the story patterns that are present in my life experience. What are those stories that show up? How do I, is it creator? Is it hero? Is it lover? Is it ruler? Is it magician? Each of those story patterns can give us a little bit of a clue of who am I and what motivates me. If you think about characters in a story, we get to know that they're motivated by different things, by different ideas. And so in the system that we use at CultureTalk, there are actually 12 different patterns. And I want to give an actual example when I say, different motivations. They also have different strengths, and they have different what we call shadow traits. And so I'll give you an example. Let's think about the every person as an archetypal story. The every person is somebody who is motivated to kind of level the playing field. They look at things in the world, they're kind of triggered when things are unfair or when things in an organization are unfair, and they ask that question, why, what would make it good for everybody? And we count on them when they show up on a team. We really count on them to be the ones that are inclusive, to be the ones that are welcoming, to be the ones to say, come into this group, be part of our group. Here's what we're all about. Those are the strengths of that every person pattern. Now, the shadow sides, is that sometimes when someone has high every person, they're so focused on that inclusivity and the idea that we're okay, we're all in this together, that they fail to really stretch the limits. They fail to push the team further. They don't want anyone to stand out, so they kind of hold us all back in a way. So that would be an example of one of the archetypes. And maybe as I'm talking about that, does that reflect you? Is that something that you connect with, this idea of equality and fairness? Is that something that motivates you? And now let me compare it to a second pattern. The second pattern I'm going to choose is the explorer pattern. And the explorer has very, very different motivation than the every person. The explorer is actually motivated to see what's out there. So instead of being focused on what's happening here in a group of people, the explorer is focused way out there, just over the horizon. They're looking and they're actually pushing themselves. They're curious. They're very self-directed to go out and find new ideas, new ways of doing things. And we can count on them to bring that back to a team, but instead of being like part of this inclusive group, they tend to be more individualistic. They tend to be sometimes a little bit of a loner. And that same pattern that drives new thinking and new ideas and new innovations can also be a pattern that shows up as shadow that gets people kind of out there on their own, like not on the team, kind of running their own show, or, lacking the kind of follow through and commitment that teams need. So let's just say for a minute, you're a leader and you have these two different patterns. How do you manage How do you get each of those people engaged and motivated? And what we see on teams is that I'm going to mention 3 different ways right now that those patterns and measuring those patterns and validating those patterns and seeing yourself in those patterns can make a difference. And it's going to start actually at the individual level. So say you're running a team and you have one of those every person, you have one of those explorer personality types. What you'll start to see is that, people can tap into their strengths and they can share with each other. They have a language now to share with each other. What am I noticing? What do I care about? What am I not care about? Because our archetypes also they're a lens we put on. And sometimes we can use them to really rule out different ideas and things that are not important to us. But when individual team members show up and they go, ooh, my patterns are every person and ruler, or my patterns are explorer and hero, or in my case, my patterns are creator and lover and caregiver, I can now introduce myself. I have like words, I have like a storyline that I can share. How have my patterns taken me to where I am today? How do I lean into the strengths of those patterns? What can you count on me for? And immediately what we begin to see when people introduce themselves this way is we start to hear their stories. We start to hear stories about what they were thinking about in grade school, or something that happened to them when they were, on the football team or in the girls' choir, or, something they care about in their personal life that's super important to them, that they can now articulate through the lens of this story. And so we see a lot of vulnerability begin to open up. We see team members going, oh, God, I've worked with you for 7 years and I had no idea that you liked that or you cared about that. And we know that vulnerability builds trust, right? We want to get to know each other. So if you're a leader and you can even model, and here are my archetype patterns, here are some of the ways those patterns serve me, here's some of the way those patterns help me lead, but here are also some of the shadow traits of those patterns that I still struggle with. And by everybody taking that opportunity to reveal a little bit more about themselves, we see teams start to gel. We see that trust and that vulnerability start to become tangible on the team. I trust you a little bit more with how you're going to respond to me because you understand my stories. You understand what I'm good at. You understand too, because I've owned it, some of the things that are challenging for me. And so we see compassion, we see stronger connections, we see ways that people begin to appreciate each other. So I think building trust fast is a thing that a leader should care about. And that's something that you can do with archetypes when you're trying to engage a team. Second, I'm going to move to inclusion and belonging. It's been a time in society where there are new ideas about what does it mean to include. What does it mean when people belong in a group? And what we see is that a natural, almost organic way of inclusion and belonging taking root when a team has the concept of archetypes to work with is that we begin to see, we might look different. We might be from different countries. We may have different native languages. There might be all these different ways that we are different. But we share story as human beings. And so I might find somebody else on my team who I think I don't have a lot in common with, who actually has high creator, which is one of my top archetypes. And so, hey, wow, we begin to see we're not so different as human beings. We begin to see that actually all these different storylines are important, and we need to include all of these diverse points of view. We begin actually to appreciate. We shared a story in an article recently called The Language of Teamwork that we did in collaboration with some of our partners, our CultureTalk partners at Articulate, Real and Clear, where there was a particular person on the team who had high revolutionary energy. And the team kind of rejected some of the traits of that particular archetype. She was the only one on the team that had the revolutionary archetype. And a lot of people found her a little bit rough, a little bit abrasive, a little bit uncaring. And those might be some of the shadow sides of revolutionary. But as they got to know the different 12 patterns and they started to listen to her, you know, with a new interest in terms of what are the gifts of a revolutionary pattern. And it's not about, let's just call her Jane. It's not about Jane. What if Jane is motivated to see things that we don't see? And suddenly there's this new appreciation and this new welcoming to the team of revolutionary Jane, because actually what Jane helps us do is she keeps us from making the big mistakes and falling off a cliff. She helps us see that things are broken or that they're not working and that we should actually stop doing some of the things that we're doing. So it's a little bit of a different lens for thinking about, you know, inclusion and belonging, but another way that archetypes very naturally create that cohesiveness on teams. And then the final way that I'll mention, so opportunity number 3, is really around conflict. Groups have conflict. Individual team members have conflict between each other. One of the things we see when we look at patterns is we see that some of the patterns are even kind of naturally in conflict with each other. I'll go back to my Every Person Explorer example. We have one pattern that's all about bring everybody in for a group hug. We want people to come in and be part of a group. And we have another pattern, the Explorer, that's like, leave me alone. I'm going off to do my own thing. I don't want to be in the group. I want to be out here on my own, doing my own thing. And so there's sort of this natural conflict between those two patterns. And so when they get on a team, right, that can cause challenges, right? That every person feels, you know, insulted or betrayed when the Explorer doesn't want to come in. And the Explorer feels suffocated when someone suggests that we should like do a group activity. So even just knowing that that natural tension exists between those two patterns helps people with those two patterns go, oh, I see, it's not Cynthia pushing my buttons. It is the pattern and what they're motivated to that, you know, could potentially is in conflict with who I am. And so it's not that we're going to change, right? I say that back. We can change. And one of the ways that we can change when we see the patterns is we can consciously choose something different. We can choose how do we want to show up? How am I going to work through that? If I'm working with someone who has a pattern that I'm in conflict with, how am I going to, I'm texting, thank you, Isabel Forstman, who's my daughter and watching the questions. Can you text me the question, Isabel? Because I can't see it on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer a question. Well, I just carry out that Every Person Explorer, right? Both of those patterns have gifts. They sometimes knock heads. And being able to say that I'm knocking heads with this person, not because they're wrong or I'm wrong, but because we're naturally wired a little bit differently. So how do we work through? What are the ways, if I have a high Every Person, can I work through with this Explorer pattern? What are the ways that I can work through some of those conflicts? So, Isabel, are you going to text me the question? Maybe. We have people using these archetype patterns very successfully on teams. And I would go back to that idea of the roadmap in terms of, you can do this assessment once. Someone can identify their really strong patterns once, and then you can take this same concept out of the drawer again and again and again to say, hey, how do we resolve the conflict? Hey, how do we work more creatively together? Hey, how do we as a team problem solve? And are we looking at all of the different points of views? Here comes the question, and thank you for the question. It says, within a team, how do you track the diverse archetypes so team members remain aware of each other's archetypes? A great question. And it's followed by what tools are available. So in the CultureTalk system, we have the assessment tools where you can measure archetypes in individuals and groups. And then when you come in through our certification program, we also have a library of tools that are ready to take right into your engagements with teams. And we have, presentations, PDF workshop experiences. We have buttons, we have card decks, we have decals, we have mugs, we have things, ways to keep this language alive with people. We see on teams sometimes when they go through an archetype assessment, like we have these team grids where you can see what are the top patterns for each of the people on the grid. And these are things that we can display publicly and refer back to. But I would also share that while all of those are good tools to have to keep things alive, we have tip sheets and relationship diagrams. The language itself and the concepts themselves are so simple and so human that they're sticky. People remember them and they become like this way of interacting on a team. We had someone on our team who had high innocent pattern, and the innocent is the optimist. The innocent is like the rosy colored glasses and like the glass is half full and things are going to work out. And we love that kind of really positive energy that comes. But the innocent can also be a little bit naive. And so sometimes this particular team member would call themselves out like, oh, I know I'm following the butterflies. And they'd call themselves out for their own potential shortfalls. Or we had another person on our team who was high sage. And, when that sage pattern was going to interrupt the flow of teamwork because it needed answers. Sage tends to ask a lot of questions and need answers. That person would go, oh, I know that we don't have all the answers right now, but here are my questions. So it's just interesting as the self-awareness builds over time and deepens over time in terms of, oh, I'm doing that thing again that I do, that the team awareness and the team, I want to use the word compassion begins to build because we look at that sage, we look at that innocent, and we say, oh my God, we so appreciate what you bring to the party and we need those things. But you're doing that thing that's getting in our way again, that's getting in the way of moving us forward. So now I have another question that says, do you see individual teams using the methodology, or is it easier to have the entire organization adopting the methodology? Yes and yes. We do a lot of times when someone in our partner network is working with an organization, they might be working with a specific team, a specific leader. And so they may walk through that doorway of getting a particular team up and running and excited and working with the system. And then over time, those concepts, again, they're fun, they're sticky, they're shareable, they change kind of the dynamic of a team. And so it spreads like a virus. It spreads in a good way. And so sometimes you'll see one team using it, and then you'll see it sort of take off in an organization. It is, really powerful when you see an entire organization really embed the framework of Archetype in all of the different initiatives that they're running, both on a individual team level and across the entire organization. Because then we have like this shared language for talking about who am I, who are we, and who are all of us. And we're using those same very simple 12 storylines. And we always are using more than one storyline. So it's never like somebody's all day, everyday creator, all day, everyday explorer. We're each a unique mix of these different patterns. And so there might be times when a particular pattern is really resonating with you. And there may be times where like that same pattern that you have, you're like, not today, not there. I don't feel it. So, it's like having guideposts and guardrails. And there's a question now that says, must you be certified to access your methodology and tools? We have generally, yes, to use the assessment tools. There is a certification program that you come through. We have a certification class kicking off next Tuesday in the US, Wednesday in other parts of the world. It's September 6th here. That certification program is an 8-week online course where we teach the 12 patterns. We teach how to take these concepts and, integrate them into your learning and development programs, your leadership programs, your consulting practice, your coaching practice. If you are not somebody who's, looking for a certification program, reach out. There are ways that we can work with you, possibly bringing one of our certified partners into a conversation. And introducing the work in your organization, to give you a feel and an experience of that. I'd invite anyone to reach out who wants to hear about the certification program that starts next week. Or if you have other thoughts, other experiences using tools or using archetypes, working to engage teams and bring them on board, please feel free to add your comments and questions, additional questions here. I'm going to drop into the comment panel afterwards an example of one of the materials that we use. I was referencing earlier the Every Person Explorer patterns. And so I just want to show you one simple diagram that shows you how those two patterns come together, where they share some common energy and interest, and also where they're wired for conflict. Just give you a very small taste of the ways teams can implement and adopt these systems. So Teresa, we missed you today, we will, I'm not sure if we'll be back next week. We take every couple of Thursdays off. And next week, as I mentioned, we are starting the certification program. But thanks for joining us now or watching the recording later. Brought to you here today by CultureTalk. Have a great holiday weekend if you're in the US.